It takes just a moment. It takes just a moment. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 International E-Conference on Interreligious Dialogue. My name is Dr. Darren Slade, and I am the president of the Global Center for Religious Research, which is hosting this year's academic conference. Now, one of the great things about GCRR is that you can attend these academic conferences right from the comfort and safety of your own home without having to worry about hotel fees and travel costs, none of that. In fact, you're being joined by students, scholars, and specialists from all over the world right now. And because each of these presentations are video recorded, the information presented here will be available all across the globe for millions of people to see. Now, for those attending live, as you listen to each of the presentations, feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions, and our speaker will do their best to answer them at the end of the presentation. With that said, I'd like to introduce to you my very good friend and our next presenter, Dr. Andrew Hung, and allow me to share my screen to give a proper introduction. So Dr. Hung today is going to be discussing Charles Taylor and Paul Tillich on interreligious dialogue. Dr. Hung is a lecturer in college, professional, and continuing education at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. He teaches critical thinking, political philosophy, and Chinese culture at the Division of Social Sciences, Humanity, and Design. His research focuses on, not surprisingly, Charles Taylor, Christian ethics, Western, and Chinese philosophy. His recent publications include things like In Defense of Moral Positive Freedom from the China Graduate School of Theology Journal, Habermas and Taylor on Religious Reasoning in a Liberal Democracy, which is in the European Legacy, book called The European Legacy Toward New Paradigms, and Mencius and Berlin on Freedom, in a new book called Philosophy East and West, which is a forthcoming publication. And with that said, I'll introduce you, or I'll hand it over to my good friend, Dr. Hung. Thank you so much for doing this presentation today. You have the floor, sir.
Hey, thank you, Darren. Okay, this is my PowerPoint. So today, my presentation will focus on mainly methodology, not so much on the content about the interreligious dialogue. So it will be a philosophy, a presentation about a philosophy methodology. Actually, last time I just I have a presentation in GCRR about Charles Taylor's view on secular age, and then this one you can see it's just following the last presentation, still about Charles Taylor, but in comparison with Paul Tillich. Charles Taylor is a political philosopher, and he has a famous book published around 10 years ago. It's a secular age. In this book, he argues that one of the distinctive features of the Western secularization is the replacement of the worldview of transcendent supernatural order by the framework of immanent order. This new perspective of social reality has objectified social reality as something governed by its own laws. Under the influence of mainstream secularization theory, many people think that the immanent frame must be close to the transcendent. However, Taylor argues that the immanent frame allows both open and closed spin. It means that it's possible for us to be open to the transcendent or closed. I mean, it's in a secular world, it's not necessary for us to reject the transcendent. It's open, and it can be closed certainly. For instance, there's some atheists in this world, and they reject this idea of transcendence or whatever, and we will further discuss this about this later. Taylor points out that people living within the immanent frame is indeed endlessly experiencing cross-pressure between the open and closed perspective. The very success of natural science and the emphasis of mutual benefit by modern moral order, inspired by Grotius and Locke, have supported the rise of materialism. However, materialism draws three kinds of criticism in the past. First is there's criticism of determinism. Even if in psychology, I know many people believe in determinism, and they just think free will is an illusion. And I think this is really controversial, and in particular, from a religious perspective. And the second criticism is about a spiritual objection, that materialism has neglected our higher ethical spiritual motives. For instance, in psychology, behaviorism would not consider all this spiritual or ethical dimension. They would just think all our action are just even psychological action is just behavior. It's just expressed in behavior. They don't consider about the nature of. They don't even believe there's a kind of consciousness or whatever. And there's also aesthetic objection that for them they would just say that aesthetic response should not be just considered as another form of pleasurable reaction. They have a deeper meaning. Nevertheless, Taylor points out that many of those who share the negation of materialism also want to define themselves against orthodox religion. For instance, Kant, we know he believes in God. You can say Kant's philosophy is searching a middle way. On the one hand, he tried to endorse a theistic position. On the other hand, his position is departing from orthodox Christianity. So you can say Kant know the problem of materialism, but he also seems to reject to endorse the orthodox religion. Probably he also see something he can accept in the orthodox Christianity. And some scholars found other bases for ethics, such as starting from intuition that we have about human dignity. So all these attempts, even though they reject materialism, but they would not consider revelation or traditional orthodox teaching as kind of a foundation of ethics. They will try to find the other foundation as their for their ethics. Taylor states that there are three views of cross pressure or polarization in modern society. There are conflicts between orthodox religion and materialist atheism, conflicts between utilitarianism and Kantian ethics, and conflicts between disciplined modern moral order and Nietzschean revolt. And Taylor summarized these debates as three-corner debates. These debates between theism, secular humanism, and neo-Nietzscheans. According to Taylor, these debates and criticism show that each side raises problems of dilemmas about fullness for the others. Thus, Taylor uses the notion of fullness as a common ground for dialogue between different beliefs and traditions, and religious on religious. For example, while Nietzschean criticized Humanian as missing out on something higher in our life, Humanian argues that the sense of higher might consist of a self-dramatization of heroism, which covers our over and inability to find satisfaction in the ordinary human pleasures and fulfillment. And while Christians affirm the significance of both the sense of higher and ordinary human fulfillment, Richelieu criticized the motivation of Christian position as impure. It's out of fear, envy, and resentment. Taylor did not specify his methodology in his secular age. Actually, here's a chapter to discuss about idealism. He just defends he's not idealist. And it's quite obvious that his defense is based on the criticism of his previous work. And in this book, A Secular Age, his historical exploration of Western moral religious debates seems to show that his approach is just like his moral genealogy. It's just kind of continuity with his previous method. His moral genealogy present in his source of the self. In the source of self, he's also given a historical account of the development and the debate of Western moral religious view. In sources, Taylor argues that in the face of these constricting moral views, there's a great need for undistorted articulacy about the vision of the good that actually underlie our moral reactions, affinities, and aspirations. To articulate moral intuition is to move from certain moral commandments, external action, description, to the language of what Clifford Geertz called thick description. And for Taylor, there's different points for moral articulations. Actually, I in my paper I tried to summarize 7, but I just list 5. 5 points for moral articulation. Articulation for Taylor can deepen our understanding of moral values and reactions by showing what underpins them. And articulation also helps us to be aware of the complexity of moral life and the diverse range of goods. Through adding a deep perspective of history, one can bring out what is still implicitly working in contemporary life. And fourth, understanding the underpinning of moral responses in a fuller and clearer way can make it easier to debate rationally about morality. And fifth, articulation is a necessary condition to assess the moral source of those goods. I would say that the first and the fifth is the most significant reason for Taylor to stress the significance of moral articulation. Since in the source of self, he always criticized many modern theories are a kind of ethics of inarticulacy. They don't know what's underlying of their moral view. So that's why he stressed very much on the kind of historical retrieval of of morality, of moral goods. He just thinks that contemporary ethics has covered many important moral sources of traditional religious moral view. And Taylor believes that by articulation, we can get in touch with these moral sources, and these moral sources can empower us to behave morally. And as we said before, in Taylor's historical account, it always involves different controversies between different moral views. And the point is, the question is how we can arbitrate between these different moral views. And Taylor suggests that we can arbitrate these controversies by using the best account principle. Taylor suggests 3 criteria for the best account principle. The transition from one account to another is considered as gain if, first, one can make better sense of inner difficulties than the interlocutor can. And second, one presents a development which cannot be explained on the interlocutor's own term. And third, it can be described as mediated by an error-reducing move. Actually, I think Taylor has taken reference to Thomas Kuhn's the theory of scientific revolution, his theory of paradigm shift. I think he has take reference to the Kuhn's theory by finding out this best account principle. Taylor, through his moral genealogy, compares these different philosophical religious thoughts, examine the debate among them, and make judgment about which thought can give us a better interpretation of moral predicament and what we can learn from each other through such debates. Thus, I would call Taylor's method as a historical comparative hermeneutical approach. Actually, Taylor has given a name for his approach. He called it transition in reasoning. However, I think this name is not very clear. I mean, we cannot really grasp what kind of transition in reasoning is talking about. So I think historical comparative hermeneutical approaches seems to be much better for us to grasp his theory, his approach. And Taylor's historical retrieval has shown that Christian faith can make better sense than atheism in explaining the ineliminable aspiration of transcendence affirmed by both theism and Nietzschean. I think this conclusion can be found, in the source of self, and it is implicitly shown in the secular age. The concern of universal benevolence, emphasized by, first of all, the concept of universal benevolence emphasized by secular humanism was actually inherent from the affirmation of ordinary life stressed by the Reformation. It means that secular humanism is actually motivated by the moral sources that cannot be explained in its own term. And that's why in this perspective, he will think that theism can give a better explanation of our moral situation than secular humanism. However, Taylor's notion of fullness, a starting point of dialogue, is very much controversial. First of all, atheists criticize Taylor for neglecting those who are religious indifference. And actually, this is what I finished in the last presentation. As what I said, among Chinese, I can see many people, even though they will worship, they were involved in certain kind of folk religion, they will worship deities. But in a certain sense, you can say they are also religious indifference. They will just they worship deity just for seeking certain protection or seeking the certain benefit given by this deity, rather than really devoted in their religious teaching. So you could say all these people, even though they involve in many different, even though they involve in religious practice, they are seriously, they are actually not really concerned about religion. And second, there are different kinds of transcendence. Other than Christian transcendence, let's say different scholars suggest that there's a horizontal transcendent and mundane transcendent. And third, most critically, Taylor's notion of fullness is incompatible with ultimate concern of Buddhism, which shares the idea of nirvana, sunyata, and antaman. I think this is the most critical in my presentation. I really think that Taylor's notion of fullness cannot be compatible with this Buddhist concept. And in contrast, the concept of ultimate concern by Paul Tillich is very much welcomed by and very influential to North American and East Asian religious scholars. For Tillich, theology must deal with our ultimate concern, which is objectively, fundamentally, and infinitely relevant to our life, rather than simply satisfying our subjective feelings. Tillich uses the method of correlation as a way of uniting the message and cultural situation, which is to correlate the question implied in the culture with the answers implied in the message. The method of correlation means that the culture, we try to analyze the culture to raise the question about our existential problem, and then we try to find the answer from the religious message. So Tillich's method of correlation argues that philosophy deals with the structure of being in itself. Theology deals with the meaning of being for us. Thus, a philosophical analysis of the reality can formulate question about being that theology answers based on divine revelation. However, while Tillich allows other religious experiences as independent sources for the formation of theology, he only considers non-Christian religions as a kind of cultural expression. It means that one can formulate the existential questions implied in these religious cultural expressions, which the Christian message is supposed to answer. For Tillich, theologians must work within the theological circle. If a theologian is open to other original revelations, she has already left the theological circle because she has left the revelatory situation and looks at it in a detached way. However, Derek Tracy, by examining Tillich's own writing, argues that Tillich's actual use of the method of correlation is more dialectic and pluralistic, and presents a picture closer to Tillich's authentic position than the method written in his systematic theology. Tillich's writings shows that he even allows the answer, not only the question, of psychoanalysis, socialist theory, existentialism, and his own self-transcending naturalism to shape his theology. This more puristic dialectic method is also more in line with the hermeneutical character of much contemporary theology. Thus, I would call Tillich's actual method as the method of dialectical correlation. In Christianity and the Encounter of the World Religions, Tillich argues for four presuppositions as the foundation for interreligious dialogue. First, mutual recognition of the value of religious experience, and second, serious religious conviction of each representatives. Tillich would say that if one is not seriously devoted in one's religion, then one cannot truly be representative for of that religion, to say something about that religion. And third is the common ground for dialogue, and the fourth is openness to criticism. While the first, second, and fourth show Tillich's ethical attitude for interreligious dialogue, his common ground for dialogue is using the concept of ultimate concern. In contrast to Tillich's notion of fullness, Tillich's concept of ultimate concern was widely appreciated in religious studies both in America and in Asia. As Smith states, Tillich's understanding of religion as an ultimate concern provides a language deemed suitable to the new Department of Religious Studies in the country's higher education institution. Lai also points out some Chinese scholars affirm the importance of this concept for the discussion related to religion, and even make use of this concept to interpret Confucianism or Buddhism. I think Tillich's concept has two contributions to interreligious dialogue. First, Tillich's concept of ultimate concern refers not only to what concerns us subjectively, it also asks whether the object of concern is truly ultimate, determining our being or non-being. And thus, it can pose a challenge to those of reductive materialism or religious indifference that whether what concerns them seriously without the aspect of transcendence is truly ultimate, in particular in the face of this ever-changing world in which everything won't last forever. I would not expect that this would persuade those materialists and secularists to accept the significance of transcendence. However, this can at least stimulate and bring out a substantive, meaningful debate or dialogue among religious and non-religious persons. Second, the second contribution is that the popular acceptance of Tillich's concept of ultimate concern among religious, cultural, and philosophical theories seems to show that it has captured the crucial nature of religious philosophical exploration. Tillich's concept has offered a common point for dialogue among different religions by which an interpretative dialogue framework can be formulated. For instance, in Confucian-Christian dialogue, Ren is obviously Confucius' ultimate concern, which can be dialogued with Christian idea of sanctification. In Buddhist Christian dialogue, Buddhist ultimate concern are liberation, suffering, emptiness, which can dialogue with Christian idea of sin, suffering, liberation and reconciliation, and kingdom of God. With Tillich's method of dialectical correlation, it's not only that Confucianism and Buddhism should pose questions about liberation from suffering and becoming one, that Christianity answers, but also that Christianity should pose questions such as questions about sin and salvation, eternal life, and communion with the Creator, that Confucianism and Buddhism answers. We should not only consider Christian message, but also message from Confucianism and Buddhism in shaping our religious thought. The question then follows after comparing these different religious answers to our existential problems. How can we arbitrate the difference between these different religious messages? Religious comparison can help find out the similarities and difference between different religious thoughts. This can enhance our mutual understanding. It also help us obtain a better understanding of our own religious tradition. However, I just want to find something more by doing religious dialogue. And Tillich would assess other religious messages based on Christian belief and reject those that deny Christian fundamental assertion that Jesus is Christ. I think certainly there's nothing wrong. I mean, Paul Tillich is a theologian. He certainly should stand at the Christian should take a Christian perspective to view this, but this Christian-centric approach would hardly be accepted by other religious persons. I would argue that Tillich's historical comparative hermeneutical approach may offer a more meta-religious perspective to arbitrate these religious messages. We may start with Tillich's method of dialectical correlation and come up with several issues as a matter of ultimate concern, such as liberation from suffering, moral cultivation, sin and salvation, etc., with answering messages from different religions. And then we can arbitrate these different religious messages by Tillich's historical comparative hermeneutical approach and examine which religion can make better sense of our moral spiritual predicament according to best account principle. It's likely that people with different religious life experience will come up with different conclusions even after such substantive comparative studies. However, such arbitration and evaluation of different issues between different religions can help us to have a deeper mutual understanding and push us to have a deeper reflection on one's own religious tradition. Apart from comparative studies, historical accuracy is also important for achieving an in-depth religious dialogue. Taylor insists that it's insufficient to simply finding out certain commonalities or simply achieving certain overlapping consensus on certain moral values, rights, and ideas throughout the intercultural dialogue. Attempts of deeper mutual learning and substantive articulation of values and ideas must follow in order to achieve a fusion of horizons. The aim of dialogue is not only to achieve a kind of sympathetic mutual comprehension, to make the moral spiritual universe of the other seeming less strange, but also to make judgment between different moral spiritual outlooks, to learn from each other, and hopefully to create a new hybrid form of moral spiritual frameworks. And that's the end of my presentation. Welcome to have any question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Hung. Thank you. I find it interesting, as always, Tillich is somebody who wants to concentrate so much on ultimate concerns. And you list certain things like the concern for virtue, for more existential type of concerns, right?
Liberation from suffering.
Correct. Yeah, suffering. These
moral cultivation.
Right. What's interesting, though, is in a lot of the religious circles that I am familiar with, they would say that those are not ultimate concerns, that those are not that the ultimate concern is Jesus Christ and salvation in him.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What would Tillich say to something like that?
Tillich certainly agrees since he's Christian theologian. But he knows that different religions will have different ultimate concern. Since he has experience with he has visited Japan. I mean, in the later part of his life, and he did learn something about have a conversation with Buddhism and know something about Asian religions. So he knows different religions will have different kind of ultimate concern, and so that's the it can be a starting point. I mean, even though Christian's ultimate concern is different from Buddhism, however, Buddhism's ultimate concern can also let's say how to liberate from suffering. I mean, this you can also to be dialogue with Christian. I mean, you can also find something about suffering in Christian message. So I think this is the contact point, right? Yeah.
Okay. Is that the essence basically of Tillich's interreligious dialogue? The paradigm that he has is find the common ground between what both religions think is of at least some concern. Maybe it isn't always the ultimate concern always, but things like suffering or morality or helping the poor. Is he suggesting that religions connect on that level then? And that's how you dialogue?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Since he has written something about Buddhism and Christian dialogue, and he actually focus on these issues. Certainly, some critics will find that Tillich's understanding of Buddhism is not accurate, but it doesn't matter. I mean, the way is the method is this. I mean, they will try to find some issue. I mean, common ground, and for Buddhism, I mean, nirvana or liberation from suffering or selfless is ultimate concern. Actually, even Buddhism, then there's different school of Buddhism. So different schools of Buddhism has different ultimate concern. So that's just a contact point to start the dialogue. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Is that reductionistic to basically say, in order for us to have a dialogue between religions, we need to find at the base level what we all agree we're concerned about and go from there?
Reductionist. It's a good question. I didn't think about this. For me, I don't think it's a reductionist since Tillich's really experience of that interreligious dialogue is not much. I mean, he has not much chance to have such substantive dialogue. But I think it's afterward. I mean, afterward his studies, I can see different, let's say, Confucianism and Buddhism. They really endorse this concept. I mean, to keep dialogue with Christianity. So I can see they will not just stop on those issues. They will also find out what's the difference between, let's say, Confucianism and Christian. So I think I don't think it's a kind of reductionism, but I think it just gives us a starting point to open the dialogue.
Yeah.
To expand it later. Yeah.
So start with what you have in common.
Yes.
And build from there. And when you've established the dialogue, when you've established the trust and the rapport, then you can go into the nuances of the differences and maybe the struggles between the religions.
Yes, I think I can see it's the way the Confucian and Christian dialogue operate in this way. I mean, they Confucians will consider about how to become a Ren, more about moral cultivation, to be virtuous person, perfect virtuous person, and they will start from here to dialogue with Christianity, and then they will also talk about transcendence. Actually, Confucianism in before are not concerned so much about the transcendence, but in face of the Christianity, they talk so much about transcendence. They will have to reply this charge, and they will also talk about transcendence, even though it's a kind of immanent transcendence for Confucianism. So I think it's not a reductionism. It's just a starting point, and then it may expand through dialogue. Since, let's say, something something you can find in Christianity and you cannot find in Confucianism. It really brings a challenge for them to think about this perspective.
Interesting. Okay. Are there areas where focusing on ultimate concern will actually create division and antagonism between the religions? I think of, let's say, for whatever reason, we're in dialogue with ISIS, with members of ISIS. And for them, ultimate concern is not only following the will of Allah, but also imposing it very strictly in their region of control. That to them might be an ultimate concern, whereas the being liberated from suffering may not actually be part of their ultimate concern. So would focusing on ultimate concerns ever be a hindrance and actually create the division?
I don't think it's such a antagonistic, I mean, such a hostility between different regions is not because of their ultimate concern, or rather is because of how they view the other regions. I mean, how they view themselves in the history and how they see the other regions. Let's say, I mean, honestly, actually, Christian belief is also quite absolute, you know, for Christian. I mean, Christian doctrine, Trinity or salvation or all this for them is also absolute. I mean, but I don't think, I mean, at least in Chinese community, a Christian, they let's say me, I'm a Christian in Chinese community. I mean, I'm in an environment of a multicultural environment, and actually, I was brought up in a quite traditional Chinese environment, so I can understand. I mean, those who are not Christian, they don't know all this, and they cannot understand, at least at this moment. So I think such a hostility between different regions is not whether it's ultimate concern or not about, I mean, the region. Rather, it's their attitude, I mean, towards the differences.
Oh, interesting.
So
okay.
Yeah, I actually I don't I don't know. I don't know much about ISIS. Actually, I don't know whether ISIS will use ultimate concern as their wording. I mean,
Sure. No, that's an interesting point that you're arguing basically that there is a chance that there is still common ground and that it wouldn't be the ultimate concerns that creates the division, but rather the attitude and approach to the dialogue in the first place. That's what would end up creating the division.
yeah, yes, you can say so. Actually, even let's say Tillich brings out ultimate concern, he already acknowledged that different regions has different ultimate concern. So whether you, I think the point is whether you acknowledge the different regions can be their concern ultimately is different. So your ultimate concern does not mean is everyone's is the same. I mean, I just think I don't think it is related to those terrorists or hostility between different regions.
Well, I'm curious, as a Tillichian scholar, do you find that there's anything in there that, and I guess this will go for Charles Taylor as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find, what is your biggest criticism? Where do you think that there is a big weakness in either Charles Taylor or Paul Tillich or both?
Charles Taylor's the weakness is already mentioned in the presentation. I think his notion of fullness is really controversial. It's actually inherent from Aristotle's eudaimonic ethics, and even honestly, even let's say in Protestant, you know, there's divine command theory. They may not consider the notion of fullness as the fundamental of the ethics, you know. So it's really Aristotelian, and it cannot it may not work in other regions.
Oh, interesting.
And for Tillich, I think Tillich is he endorsed a historical approach, and I really appreciate his method of correlation. But I just think Charles Taylor, I think he has learned many things from hermeneutics, and hermeneutics is not that well developed in Tillich's time. So I think Taylor's hermeneutical approach, in particular his best account principle, I mean, it really gives us certain criteria for us to judge. I mean, to judge different religious messages, and this is what I cannot find in Tillich. As what I said, Tillich's approach is still based on his judgment. Seems that still based on certain fundamental theological principles or messages. And I think as a theologian is right, but probably Taylor is a philosopher, so he will not. He has to be dialogue with different philosophers, non-religious and religious, and different traditions. So he will know that that the judgment cannot be, if in order for us to have dialogue with different traditions, we cannot judge others by using the Christian perspective.
Well, that's actually you kind of touched on it a little bit. Of one of my concerns with both, that in fact, is that both Charles Taylor and Paul Tillich seem to approach interreligious dialogue philosophically, as opposed to something more pragmatically, something more practical. And so I often wonder, is their methodology a little high end, a little too, cerebral, a little too cognitive and philosophically based?
You mean unpractical?
Correct.
But
maybe not unpractical, but a bit out of reach for the common
people.
Right.
Oh yeah, you can say it's really for scholars. it's not for the lay person.
Yeah. Okay.
It's really for scholars. Yeah.
And that would be probably my biggest concern, is that it's a great philosophical foundation, a great cognitive and intellectual dive into the notion of interreligious dialogue. But on the ground level, does it help Muslims and Jews and Christians and Buddhists work together for a common good, if you will? It allows scholars to interact with each other, but does it allow the common layperson to interact with each other?
I just think usually those the culture, or those the thought, this kind of thinking, I mean, usually is diffused from the scholar, I mean, to the layperson, right? Let's say I'm a Protestant or Christian, in a traditional Protestant Christian, usually we will think Catholic is wrong, but later on, I mean, it usually starts with the scholars. I mean, they are open attitude towards Catholic will also influence me, and they will bring out certain points. I mean, let us understand. I mean, I think it's not either or. I think the scholar, even though what they provide is for scholar, but it can help, I mean, to popularize all these different
You're saying it'll trickle down eventually.
Yeah, trickle down. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and there is evidence that belief systems do change after the seminary and the university has kind of brought in new stuff. The problem is that the trickle down effect doesn't happen for a generation or so. It can take decades of dialogue in between the scholars for it to reach down to the common person.
Yes, probably.
and that's because of the middle level. Oftentimes the scholars will be talking about it up here, which then finally gets filtered down to the pastors and the preachers, the imams and the rabbis and the monks and the priests, and they disseminate it, but it takes time.
Yes. on the one hand, it takes time. On the other hand, I also think it really depends on where. I mean, in which city. You know, if let's say in Hong Kong, it's very international. Then it seems we used to be stimulated by very different viewpoint. So in many Chinese, I mean, Christian Chinese theologian, I mean, they have been in the U.S. or in Canada. They will say that it seems that in Hong Kong, mainly the Christian are evangelicals. They will feel that the evangelicals in Hong Kong is much open than those in Canada and America. So I just think probably in the US, let's say if you are in a place not as New York or the big city, you know, or what I'm not very familiar with the city. I have been where Chicago or all these, you know, very advanced city. Then maybe, let's say in the past I've heard a few Christians saying that they're well, I mean that where they live all are traditional Christians, so they didn't get in touch with other religions or whatever, so they don't have such stimulation.
They
so
don't
they'll
have
take it for granted
to diversity.
Yeah, they have no such exposure, so they will take what they used to believe for granted. And so I think the situation also affect their attitude towards other religion.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We do know just from sociological and psychological studies that the more exposure people have to divergent belief systems in their environment, the more diverse their environment is, the more open they are to dialogue, to empathy. The more isolated a group is, the more homogenous that group is, the less tolerant they become. So you're absolutely right. And it is interesting to think about on the ground level, is it possible for the higher end philosophical stuff to reach them quicker because they're in a more diverse area, which means they might end up having more exposure to the higher end philosophical stuff.
Probably the internet will help.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Really, probably internet will help.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Hung, thank you so much for this presentation. It was wonderful.
Okay,
again.
Thank you.
And really enlightening. I'm a big fan of both Charles Taylor and Paul Tillich, so it's always fun listening to their different approaches to different aspects. So thank you so much again. And I do want to say to everybody in attendance, thank you for attending, coming out and supporting us. We do have a full day of presentation, so I hope I'll see you at some of the other lectures. And Dr. Hung, I'll give you the last word, sir.
Thanks everyone for listening to my presentation. I'm still writing my paper. If you have any comments, welcome to send me your opinions and comments or criticism. Thank you. Bye-bye.